In January 1928, Henry Ford sat down with Forbes magazine and said something that sounds almost reckless for the richest industrialist in America. "We didn't start from Model T and attempt to improve that. We started from scratch. He just killed the most successful product in automotive history, a car that had sold 15 million units, and rebuilt from zero. The Model A launched months later and became an immediate hit. Now, here's what caught my attention. Nearly a century later, in 2003, another entrepreneur told the same magazine almost the exact same thing. Elon Musk, fresh off selling PayPal for $1.5 billion, said the only way to ensure humanity's survival was to build a civilization on Mars. Both men gave Forbes the same performance. The visionary who sees what nobody else can, and both times Forbes printed it like gospel.
And that pattern, the maverick genius confiding his world-changing vision to a single magazine, didn't happen twice. It happened 20 times across 100 years. Ford, Edison, Watson, Gates, Bezos, Zuckerberg. Forbes collected these quotes like trading cards, and each one followed the same script: the lone innovator, the impossible dream, the inevitable triumph. But when you line them up side by side, something uncomfortable emerges. These aren't just interviews. They're origin myths carefully constructed to serve the interests of both the magazine and the mogul. It's time to understand this deeply.
So here's the thesis I want to lay out. For over 100 years, Forbes has functioned less as journalism and more as a credentialing machine for America's wealthiest entrepreneurs. The magazine gives them a platform to craft their own mythology. In return, the entrepreneurs give Forbes access, exclusivity, and the reflected glow of genius. And the people who pay the price are everyone else: workers, competitors, regulators, and the public, who absorb these myths as truth and shape policy around them.
That's a strong claim. But look at the structure of these interviews. Not a single one includes a hard follow-up question. When Henry Kaiser said in 1942, "Above all, get the job done," Forbes didn't ask him about the working conditions in his shipyards, where laborers died at alarming rates during the wartime production rush. When Bill Gates said in 1991 that it was Microsoft, not IBM, who made MS-DOS the standard, nobody pressed him on the antitrust implications of what he was openly describing as a monopoly strategy.
The metrics suggest something systematic. I counted 20 featured interviews spanning from 1928 to 2023. In not one of them does Forbes challenge the entrepreneur's central claim. Not once. That's not journalism. That's a service.
And the service runs both directions. Forbes gets to position itself as the magazine where history's greatest minds reveal their secrets. The entrepreneurs get something far more valuable: a permanent, quotable record that frames their wealth as the natural consequence of vision rather than the product of power, timing, lobbying, or exploitation.
Think about Thomas Edison in 1929. The man was 82 years old, telling Forbes he planned to work until he was the equivalent of 155. The magazine treated this as charming eccentricity. But Edison at that point was aggressively litigating against competitors, using patent law to crush smaller inventors. His Wizard of Menlo Park persona was already a carefully maintained brand, and Forbes was helping polish it.
The customer insights show something deeper here. These interviews weren't read in a vacuum. They shaped how Americans understood capitalism itself. When Sam Walton told Forbes in 1977 that Walmart's success came from listening to department heads, they're the ones who really know what's going on. He was constructing a narrative of democratic bottom-up business. Meanwhile, Walmart was already pioneering the union-busting tactics that would define its labor relations for decades.
And Forbes printed that Walton quote without a single mention of labor conditions, not one word about wages. The magazine framed it as folksy wisdom from a modest man whose stock had risen 700%.
So the question becomes, who benefits from this arrangement? And the answer is remarkably consistent across 100 years. The entrepreneurs get legitimacy, Forbes gets access, and the reading public gets a fairy tale dressed up as business reporting.
Let me trace how this mythology engine actually operates, because the mechanics are more revealing than any single quote. Start with Thomas Watson Sr. at IBM in 1930. The Depression had just begun, millions of Americans were losing everything, and Watson told Forbes no one has to be a genius to succeed in business. One does not have to lie awake nights worrying about his job. That quote wasn't just tone deaf. It was strategic. Watson was building IBM's corporate culture around the idea that success was a matter of character, not circumstance. If you followed the rules, did what common sense dictates, you'd be fine. This framing served IBM enormously. It justified a hierarchical corporate structure where loyalty to the company was the highest virtue, and it deflected any systemic critique of why some people succeeded while others starved.
And Forbes ran it without context. No mention that unemployment had hit 8.7% and was climbing toward 25%. No voice from the workers Watson claimed didn't need to worry. The magazine treated his platitudes as philosophy.
Fast forward to 1986. Michael Milken, the junk bond king, gave a speech to high school students that Forbes covered by sending a reporter undercover. Milken called finance an art form and said the real scarce resources were management, knowledge, vision. 3 years later, he was indicted on 98 counts of racketeering and fraud. He pleaded guilty to 6 felonies and paid $600 million in fines.
But that 1986 Forbes piece, it presented Milken as a misunderstood genius. An art form that's greatly misunderstood, he said, and the magazine let that stand as the final word. No investigation of the insider trading allegations already swirling. No questions about the leveraged buyout wave that was hollowing out American companies and destroying jobs.
If we connect these dots, a precise pattern emerges. Forbes consistently interviews entrepreneurs at the peak of their myth-making, when the narrative is most useful and least scrutinized, and the magazine's editorial frame always tilts toward admiration.
The pattern holds even when the subjects are women and people of color, though with revealing differences. Ruth Handler in 1966 was asked about Barbie's production problems, the closest any of these interviews comes to accountability. But the framing was still sympathetic. She'd trusted in the professionalism of her manufacturers. The fault lay elsewhere. When Oprah Winfrey spoke at a Forbes event in 2012, she described becoming a brand by making every decision flow from the truth of myself. Forbes didn't ask about the labor practices at Harpo Productions or the economics of daytime television that extracted enormous value from audiences while concentrating wealth at the top.
Robert Johnson, America's first black billionaire, told Forbes in 2001 that BET's distribution was like having a small boutique on Fifth Avenue. He'd just sold the network to Viacom for $3 billion. Forbes celebrated the deal. Nobody asked what BET's programming, widely criticized for reinforcing stereotypes, had cost black communities culturally in exchange for Johnson's personal fortune.
And this is where the mythology engine reveals its true function. It doesn't just celebrate wealth, it launders the process of wealth accumulation. Every uncomfortable question about labor, about monopoly, about cultural harm, about who gets left behind, gets erased by the heroic narrative.
I want to push back on something, though, because there's a counter-argument that these interviews do contain real insight, and that Forbes was documenting history, even if imperfectly. Bill Gates in 1991 openly admitted that Microsoft, not IBM, drove MS-DOS to dominance. It was up to us to get people to focus their development on it, to get other manufacturers to license it. That's a confession of monopolistic intent published in plain sight.
But that's precisely the problem. Gates said it because he knew Forbes wouldn't frame it as a confession. The magazine treated it as evidence of entrepreneurial brilliance. Gates outsmarted IBM. The scrappy software guy beat the corporate giant. The fact that this scrappiness involved systematically locking competitors out of the market, that wasn't the story Forbes wanted to tell.
George Lucas made a similar admission in 1996. Those who control the means of production control the creative vision, he told Forbes. He was talking about owning cameras and film, but the principle extends far beyond Hollywood. Lucas was describing the logic of vertical integration, the same logic that would later drive Amazon, Google, and Meta to control every layer of their respective ecosystems.
And Forbes printed it as if Lucas were simply a passionate filmmaker protecting his art, not as a blueprint for the platform monopolies that would reshape the global economy over the next 3 decades.
Wait, that changes things for me. Because if Forbes was publishing these admissions in plain sight, maybe the magazine's role isn't just flattery. Maybe it's something more insidious, normalizing monopolistic behavior by wrapping it in the language of innovation and vision.
That's the deeper pattern. When Jeff Bezos told Forbes in 1998 that online sellers needed to offer an overwhelming value proposition, he was describing what would become Amazon's strategy of subsidizing losses to destroy competitors. The company lost $27.06 million that year. Forbes asked when he expected to make a profit. Bezos deflected, and the magazine let him because the narrative of the visionary founder who sees what nobody else can was too valuable to puncture.
And look at where that narrative led. By the time Bezos appeared on the Forbes cover 20 years later, he was worth $160 billion. The magazine that had given him a platform to dodge questions about profitability now celebrated the fortune that dodging had produced. The circle closed perfectly.
Let me push back on that for a second, though. Isn't there genuine value in capturing what these people thought at the time? Historians would kill for a 1928 interview with Ford or a 1929 conversation with Edison. The fact that Forbes didn't ask tough questions doesn't erase the documentary value.
It doesn't erase it, but it distorts it. Because these aren't raw documents. They're curated performances. Every entrepreneur in these interviews was performing for an audience, and Forbes was the stage. The documentary value is real, but it's the value of understanding propaganda, not truth. Which brings us to the present. Because the Forbes interview machine didn't stop in 2023, it accelerated. And the stakes are now incomparably higher. When Elon Musk told Forbes in 2003 that colonizing Mars was vital to the future of humanity, he controlled 2 companies and was worth roughly $200 million. Today, in February 2026, he operates 6 major enterprises: Tesla, SpaceX, xAI, Neuralink, The Boring Company, and X. His net worth fluctuates around $200 billion. And his relationship with the U.S. government has become so intertwined through SpaceX's lunar and defense contracts that the line between public servant and private profiteer has effectively dissolved.
The competitive landscape here is unlike anything in the previous century of Forbes interviews. When Ford or Edison or Watson wielded enormous power, they operated in single industries. Musk simultaneously controls electric vehicles, space launch, artificial intelligence, brain-computer interfaces, tunneling infrastructure, and a global media platform. And that media platform, X, gives him something none of his predecessors had: the ability to shape the narrative about himself in real time without needing Forbes at all.
But he still uses Forbes, because the magazine provides something X cannot: the veneer of independent validation. When Forbes profiles Musk, it's not a tweet. It's journalism, or at least it looks like it. And that distinction matters enormously for regulatory perception, investor confidence, and public trust.
And the AI connection makes this even more concerning. Musk's xAI is developing capabilities that directly intersect with X's content moderation systems. The same artificial intelligence tools could simultaneously generate content, moderate speech, and shape public perception, all under one person's control. When Mark Zuckerberg told Forbes in 2023 that there wouldn't be one central superintelligence but lots of different AIs, he was describing a future that conveniently matched Meta's business model. And Forbes, predictably, didn't challenge that framing.
From a scaling perspective, consider what Jensen Huang told Forbes in 2008 about processing horsepower. He imagined a world where every building on Earth existed in photorealistic 3D. All of those experiences are possible already, he said. NVIDIA's market cap has since exploded past $3 trillion. But the question Forbes never asked, and still hasn't asked, is who controls the infrastructure that makes those experiences possible, and what happens when that control is concentrated in the hands of 3 or 4 companies.
So the mythology engine hasn't just persisted into 2026, it's become more powerful and more dangerous. Because the entrepreneurs it celebrates now wield influence that would have been unimaginable to Ford or Edison, and the magazine that credentials them still hasn't learned to ask the uncomfortable questions.
I've been wondering about this, whether the problem is Forbes specifically, or whether every era gets the business journalism it deserves. In the 1920s, the myth was the self-made industrialist. In the 1990s, it was the garage startup. Now it's the polymath founder who will save humanity. Each myth served the economic system of its time, and each was amplified by media that benefited from the amplification.
That's the structural insight. Forbes didn't create the myth of the heroic entrepreneur, but for 100 years it has been the most consistent and influential vehicle for that myth. And in 2026, when regulatory scrutiny of concentrated corporate power is more urgent than ever, that vehicle is still running at full speed.
So where does this leave us? We've traced a 100-year pattern of Forbes interviews that consistently celebrate entrepreneurial vision while erasing the costs of that vision to workers, to competitors, to democratic governance, to the public interest. The thesis holds, but it needs complicating.
Because the alternative isn't obvious. Should Forbes have been hostile to Edison? Should they have refused to interview Bezos? The value of these conversations is real, even if the framing is distorted. The problem isn't that Forbes talks to powerful people. The problem is that it talks to them on their terms.
And that's a choice with consequences. When Alex Karp of Palantir told Forbes in 2013 that he missed being anonymous, missed walking around Berlin going into skanky places, the magazine published it as a humanizing portrait of a reluctant mogul. Nobody asked Karp about Palantir's contracts with immigration enforcement agencies or the civil liberties implications of mass surveillance technology. The philosopher's CEO narrative made those questions disappear.
The team and culture dimension is critical here. Mark Andreessen told Forbes in 2000 that startups were radically over-romanticized, that the emotional reality was a roller coaster of euphoria and depression. That's one of the most honest quotes in this entire collection. But even that honesty served a purpose. It made Andreessen seem self-aware and trustworthy, which was useful positioning for someone about to become one of the most powerful venture capitalists in Silicon Valley.
I think, though I'm not 100% certain, that the real damage isn't in any single interview. It's in the cumulative effect. 100 years of Forbes interviews have taught Americans that wealth is proof of vision, that entrepreneurs are society's most important people, and that questioning their methods is the same as opposing progress.
And that framing has policy consequences. When regulators consider antitrust action against tech monopolies, they're operating in a culture that has been marinated in entrepreneurial mythology for a century. The instinct to protect the innovator, even when the innovator is extracting monopoly rents, runs deep, and Forbes has been one of its most effective cultivators.
If this trend continues, by 2030, we'll see an even tighter integration between the mythology machine and the power structures it serves. The entrepreneurs won't just be interviewed by Forbes. They'll own the AI systems that generate the content, moderate the platforms where it's discussed, and lobby the governments that might regulate them. The feedback loop will be complete. We started with Henry Ford in 1928, telling Forbes he'd started from scratch. We end in 2026, where the entrepreneurs Forbes celebrates have accumulated more power than Ford could have imagined, and the magazine still hasn't started from scratch on how it covers them.
The lesson isn't that these innovators lack vision. Ford did transform transportation, Gates did change computing, Bezos did reinvent commerce. The lesson is that vision and exploitation aren't opposites. They coexist often in the same sentence, in the same Forbes interview. And the job of journalism, real journalism, is to hold both truths simultaneously, not to choose the flattering one.
For deeply, that's the standard we hold ourselves to. Not hagiography, not cynicism, but the willingness to ask the question Forbes never did. Who paid the price for this vision, and was it worth it?
If this conversation made you rethink what you thought you knew about America's greatest innovators, share it. Subscribe to Deeply wherever you listen, because the stories that shape how we understand power, those are the ones that deserve the most scrutiny.